My name is Bernard West, and I am not the person in the agenda that you've got. She was not available, so as a past chair of the Chemical Institute of Canada, I am going to tell you a little bit about the International Year of Chemistry. How many people here know that 2011 is the International Year of Chemistry? Put your hands up. Well, that's pretty good. This side of the room is better than that side of the room, so there won't be a test at the end of this. Good morning and welcome. The International Year was something that an organization called the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry, along with UNESCO, devised and asked the United Nations to declare 2011 International Year of Chemistry. And this, it's a bit hard to see, but it's the web page that the International Union put together for the International Year of Chemistry. And if you want to find out what is going on around the world, you can go to that website, just Google International Year of Chemistry and you'll find it. We had a number of initiatives that we wanted to cover as a global organization, and you can see a number of these. 2011 is the 100th anniversary of Marie Curie getting her second Nobel Prize, and we wanted to celebrate that and use that as a catalyst to celebrate women in chemistry. And that there have been a number of things. If you go on the website, you will see videos of groups of women chemists getting together earlier on this year. At the opening ceremony, one of the speeches was given by Marie Curie's granddaughter, so there was a nice link back there. The other interesting project that we've got going, which Canada is involved in too, is the Global Water Project. And the idea for this was to have school children go out and measure things like pH and so on. And I'll show you what we've done in Canada on that in a few minutes. This is the Canadian initiative. IUPAC asked each country science organization, chemistry organization to take charge of doing things for the International Year. And as you can see, the Chemical Institute of Canada and the Chemistry Society have been very active. These are the initiatives, and I'll talk about a few of those in a minute. There's an organizing committee, obviously. David Dolphin from UBC was the chair of that. I was involved in fundraising, although I've got to say that most of the fundraising has been done by Roland Anderson and Bernadette Darcy, who is here in the room. As a result of that, you can see a lot of people have contributed to the initiatives that we have taken. Another way of looking at that is associations, companies, and governments have been involved in helping us to do a number of these activities. It's hung up again. Where is he? This happened yesterday. For some reason or other, the computer freezes. But let me tell you while we're getting, see if we can get this thing fixed. One of the initiatives which you maybe saw on that earlier chart was called Science Rendezvous. This was something that started at the University of Toronto, and it's now spread. There were over 30 locations in there are over 30 locations in Canada that participated in this, with public demonstrations and so on. So many, this has spread, and it will continue. We also had there we go. We'll see if this one keeps going. obviously one of the contributions that chemistry has made is the development of blue hair dye, according to this photograph. But apart from that, there was a lot of activity, and that will continue next year. The National Chemistry Week, which was in October, a lot of activities around that. You can see the lists of sorts of things that have been happening. That too will continue next year. A new thing that we have tried to become up to date and communicate in a way that is novel is a YouTube contest, and that was very successful. You can see that there was a prize of $2,500, which went to a team in BC. And if you want to look at these videos, there are a whole series of them. You just go onto YouTube and you can find them. And then the water project, I mentioned, these were the sorts of things that were being looked at. The idea of that was to engage school children in doing something that was chemistry-based, scientific, and it would allow us to pull together a picture of the quality of water around the world. And again, you can go on the international website and see what the pH of water is in different countries, and there's been a lot of activity on that, including in developing countries, because kits were made available for schools that wouldn't normally have these reagents available to them. So that might continue as an ongoing project. The Chemistry Olympiads, this is something that the International Union is now responsible for running. The way that works is schools compete. The winning school goes to a chemistry boot camp at a university, and then they go and compete at the international level. And the Canadian teams have done quite well at this. We have a stamp to commemorate the year, and it honors the work of John Poliani at U of T, and we unveiled that stamp at Nuit Blanche in Toronto earlier on this year. And you can still go to the post office and buy these stamps if you want to do that. Chemistry milestones, I'll just mention quickly. That is something that you can again see the milestones in chemistry for activities in Canada. We've been picking a few of these to go into our magazine. The one in November highlights the work that was done to develop canola as a food stock by the people in Saskatchewan. But there are a whole series of these. You can see how chemistry has contributed to the life in Canada by going in on the website and looking at those. So next year we'll continue doing some of these things. They were ongoing, they were specialized for this year, but they will carry on. And I just wanted to say thank you very much to all of the sponsors who have helped us to make this year successful. There will be a wrap-up event in Brussels at the beginning of December, and there will be someone from the CIC going to that. Brian Henry actually will be representing Canada at that ceremony, which will be sponsored by Solvay, Solvay Foundation. Solvay is one of the oldest chemical companies in the world, so it's appropriate that they help us finalize that. So that's really all I had to say about the International Year. If you've got any questions, you can ask me afterwards. And there are people here from the CIC who can also answer questions if you've got them. Thank you. Now we're going to go straight into the next session, which is a panel of industry people talking about how we get things done based on the policies that are set, but also the things that we do in industry. So we've got representatives here from various parts of the supply chain, from the resource side through transforming things in chemical plants to end users. And I think it's important, and I'm sure this will come out in the discussion, that industry business dynamics are very different from university and government dynamics. And we need to be able to devise policies that are not monolithic, that take into account these differences. And I think of policies as a sort of like a control system that tries to guide what you want as an outcome. And if the control system doesn't match the thing that it's trying to control, then you get into problems. And that's something of what we might want to think about as we go through this. The panel members are going to take about 10 minutes each to talk about the specific needs and issues of their sector. You've got bios in the background material here, so I'm not going to get into that. What we want to do is leave plenty of time for debate and questions. And I've got some questions that have already been posed. We'll start off with that, and then I think there are microphones available for people to ask questions from the floor. So without much ado, we're going to go down the list, and I think we've got one presentation, but most of the people will sit and do their talks here. So we will start off with a talk from the forestry industry background. Go ahead. You go like go. Okay.
Even without slides, it's easier to talk standing up. If the microphone were close to your height. So good morning. Among the more important deities in this universe is the god of convergence. And the god of convergence has led to a very interesting phenomena. This is also the year of the forest, International Year of the Forest. And so I assume nobody in the room knew that except me. I won't even ask. And interestingly enough, this is the year in the forest industry where the convergence of the chemical industry and the work of lumberjacks is finally being uncovered and realized. And strange that though that may seem, it's actually a very large part of what's happening economically in the forest industry. Traditional forest industry is pretty simple. You send a lumberjack out in the forest, it comes back with a tree. You take a 2x4 or 3 or 4 2x4s out of the tree. The chips from the sawing go to make pulp. Making pulp's pretty simple. You just kind of squish them. And then you flatten the pulp and you got paper. And that was our business model. The trouble with that business model is there's no barriers to entry. Anyone can do it. You can go to South America and grow the trees quickly. And so it's really hard to make any money. So everybody thought, well, the solution to that would be to add value, build pianos and violins or at least bookcases with the wood and do origami or something fancy with the paper so that you'd get more value from every tree you harvest and the industry would make money. The trouble with that is no one in Canada likes to work all that cheap. And so every time we try to make money by adding value, we found ourselves competing with the rest of the world who's willing to work cheaper and harder and occasionally even smarter. So we had to find an economic advantage that comes from being close to the tree rather than any other advantage. And what we decided was we've got to extract more value from every tree. So what do you have in a tree? Well, basically, you have everything you have in fossil fuels. It's just fresher. And so instead of thinking about refineries, we started thinking about biorefineries. Of course, we still take out the 2x4s and the chips for pulp, and we still make paper. But in addition, we extract energy, both for heating, but also biodiesel, bioethanol, biomethanol. And then we started extracting chemicals. So any chemical that you can make with a fossil fuel feedstock, you can make with a fresher feedstock. And we've got all sorts of things now, some in production, some at the pilot stage, producing additives for coatings, producing nanofibers which add huge lightness and strength. We actually make three-dimensional pulp, you know. This is really strong in 2 dimensions, but not so good in the 3rd dimension. We're now making 3-dimensional pulp, as light as paper, but as strong in 3 dimensions. So there is a market for this. The global market for bioproducts derived from the forest, leaving aside all the pulp and paper stuff, is $200 billion a year by 2015, annual. Canadian forest industry and its traditional products only does $50 billion worth of business. So it's worth, the global market is worth 4 times our traditional production. And the question that you should be asking was, how does an industry get from where it was to where it's going? What is the R&D component of it? And for us, the huge part of that was reorganizing R&D. We used to have 4 institutes looking at forest industry R&D, plus a bunch of university research. And it all suffered from the same fundamental error of thinking in silos. So we had paper researchers, there were chemical researchers, there were energy researchers, there were actually lumberjack researchers, you know, how do you chop a tree faster and more efficiently? All of that stuff was happening, but there was no system research, there's no value chain research. And so we took all the institutes, including one which was in the government, and put them all together. The private ones we really put together, the government one we virtually built into it, and got to give Natural Resources Canada credit for the leadership of saying, no, just take it and make it part of the value chain. So we actually had the value chain research happening as a system as opposed to individual pieces. And then we realized the universities are not in the system. And so we started new partnerships. We worked with NSERC and created networks of researchers, and then realized the networks weren't talking to each other. So we started creating networks of the networks. We're now looking at the use of, yes, social media to get siloed researchers to learn what each other are doing. And the result is all sorts of new opportunity for 200 rural communities that thought they were going to go out of business because the prices for lumber have tanked, and of course, fewer and fewer people are using paper. So it's a case of an industry rethinking its business model, using the fundamentals, which we're good at, chopping down trees and extracting stuff from them, but using R&D to change what we extract, and actually beginning quite strongly to migrate from feedstock to buildings and papers to feedstock for chemistry and the energy industry. A huge part of that, of course, is creating a sense of possibility for all who are interested. And so we did and this is something which I'd love to see done elsewhere, a pathway study. We asked the question, if you took a ton of wood and you transformed it into this product, that product, we actually looked at more than 40 different pathways. What is the social, economic, and environmental result of that transformation? And the results were quite astonishing, because some of the things that a lot of people thought were the future, there's just no way it's going to work, and some of our traditional products actually can be quite profitable. But we did this in a partnership with the emerging tech companies, with the forest industry, with the researchers from the research institutes, and we had a banker actually lead the study, just to keep in mind, keep our focus on where investment would actually flow. So having a banker sort of discipline the whole thing, kept the feet on the ground. Once we completed this study of pathways, it took 2.5 years, each individual company then took the results. We actually gave them the data and the analysis and the models, and applied it to their situations and decided where they would what pathways would actually work for their situation. And then realized, of course, that they can't do it because they need partners. So the second step of that was creating a partnership network in which the chemical industry, but also the energy industry, learn who in the forest industry can partner with them. we actually hold speed dating sessions, sort of like church church socials in the basement, where we invite industrialists from different places to get to know each other and get a sense of how they can partner in the pathways. So bottom line from this experience is two things. One is that opportunity comes from walking out of silos, rethinking the nature of business, which requires that you leave the structure and concept of what something is about and enter into all sorts of different systems. The second piece of this is that R&D and real R&D activity is driven by the capacity to make money. And the potential for profit suck always trumps the potential of investment in R&D push. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Avrim. The next speaker is Craig Crawford from the Bio-Auto Council. So we've gone actually from trees to automobiles. They don't grow on trees, but there are bits that can be made from trees, and Craig's going to say a bit about that.
Okay, thanks. I'll just speak from sitting down here. Very interesting to follow Avrim and the forestry, because the auto sector is working very closely with the forestry and agriculture sector to try to bring some of these new bio-based products, bio-based chemicals into the auto sector. And the reason for that is we're looking for cheaper raw materials and less toxic materials and higher performing materials. And we see over time science, the biotech, material science, green chemistry, leading to higher performing, cheaper, safer products for the auto sector. So we're very supportive of what Avrim's trying to do with the forest sector. The council, the Bio-Auto Council, which largely composed of parts makers, but we have Ontario Centres of Excellence on our board, and we have Auto 21, and we're very, very strong supporters of the link between science to industry, from lab to market. But I have to also point out that I think over the last 4 years, we also have learned the limitations of that there is a lot more to economic competitiveness and innovation than just taking an idea from a lab into the company. There are other factors, and I think the point that I'd like to make in my remarks here is, in looking at science policy, we need to look at it in a much larger terms, a much larger model of innovation and economic competitiveness. So I wanted to give an example of a company that kind of highlights the limitations of science and the role of other factors in competitiveness. And it's the story of BioAmber. BioAmber is a small company. The president has his office in Montreal. And what they did is they acquired some IP from a US company that the IP was developed by the company with support of the US Department of Energy. And they went over to France, where they've got $1 billion biotech cluster. And they leveraged that French asset to scale up the BioAmber. They make succinic acid. It's a very important biochemical platform. But you know, despite the French putting $1 billion into science and technology and creating this cluster, it was actually commercialized in North America because the raw material costs in Europe are too expensive, labor's too expensive, energy's too expensive. So the company, for business purposes, notwithstanding all of that S&T investment in France, actually located the company in North America. So when they were looking for where to site this company in North America, they looked at 100 different jurisdictions in North America. And they landed in Sarnia, Ontario. And I think it's important to sort of look at some of the reasons why did it land in Sarnia. So one is there was already an infrastructure there that was compatible. It was the Chemical Valley. There was a strong transportation logistics there, close to market, good rail, good shipping. All of the transportation factors were pointing in its support. There was a complementary and supportive regulatory environment. Ontario had passed regulations encouraging manufacturers to move to non-toxic products in the chemical and plastics. There was a supportive tax structure, low taxes. And very importantly, there were programs, supportive programs for foreign direct investment, low interest loans and grants that could help induce the company to locate. And very important, there was a very aggressive private sector leadership by the local community in Sarnia, by the Sustainable Chemistry Alliance, by the BioAuto Council, and other organizations that sort of hunted down the company. We have been working for years to try to land this company in Ontario. So when you're looking at how do you develop a very competitive manufacturing sector, the factors that go into the innovation and making it competitive include, very important, science and technology, lab to market, but a whole bunch of other factors. And I think it would be very helpful if in policy development in the federal government, if they take this kind of whole government approach to innovation and economic development, where science and technology is embedded with all the other factors that lead to a competitive economy.
Thank you. Thank you, Craig. We will get back with some questions around that whole thing. David, one of the David. Do you want to do your presentation now? And then if it gets hung up, we can get it fixed. It is hung up already. I'm going to try if I can. Oh, here we go.
Better off using paper.
We like non-movement ourselves, you know.
Where are we?
Right here.
This is it. Here,
Yep,
yeah.
right there.
Right. And then the
Click
big
on that little thing right
screen.
there.
There we go. No, that's the wrong one. Yeah. Where are we? DuPont. That's that one.
There we are.
Click on that one, and it doesn't. This one. No?
Let's see.
Where are we?
Full screen mode.
There we go.
Okay. Morning. It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks to Craig, I get an extra couple of minutes, plus the audiovisual assistance, so we'll let things rip here. What I'd like to do is, I've broken my talk into two sections. First of all, I'm from the DuPont company. You may not know much about us, so I thought what I'd do is give you an overview of the corporation, what we do in Canada, and how we're trying to grow, because I think that's relevant to, as a big multinational, what is it going to take for us to grow around the world and in the major market opportunities, and specifically in Canada, and the role of innovation in helping us do that. So on the first slide, we talk about the global collaboratory for DuPont, because we see the opportunities on a global basis, and we see the opportunity to innovate with partners around the world, and that's why we call it the global collaboratory. And yeah. This is where I dance, right? Yeah, yeah, gotcha. Okay. First of all, DuPont. Any discussion with DuPont starts in our corporation around core values, and there's 4 of them. One's around safety and health, environmental stewardship, the way we work with customers, the ethics of how we conduct our business, and of course, the way we work together in respect for people. At the end of the day, we are a market-driven science company. Our goal is to use innovation to create products that solve problems. And so we focus on science because our objective is to make sure that we can produce products and sustainable solutions that improve our society. Globally, we're about a $35 to $36 billion company. And if you look at this on $34 billion as a prorated basis, if we include our Danesco acquisition, which we made earlier this year. And as you can see from this, a very large portion of our global sales is in agriculture, nutrition, and industrial biosciences. I would have to say, though, that this is not unusual because at DuPont, almost every single meeting we have, there's some audiovisual issue, and especially if there's a customer involved. So the question is, you know, what are some of the major trends that are driving DuPont's growth? The first is the fact that, you know, the population on the earth is now at 7 billion, and in the next 40 years, we expect that to grow by another 2 billion. That's a lot of mouths to feed. So we're going to use the 67,000 employees we have globally in 90 countries to use science to provide solutions to address that need. We do that in 3 areas. First is, of course, food production. People are going to need to feed the world. The second is we're going to need to reduce the dependency we have in energy through efficiency. We need to provide alternatives to for renewable resources, and also we need to protect the environment and protect people. This is quite unfortunate. Just check that. All right. In Canada, we see 3 major opportunities for growth. Number 1, of course, is agriculture. We have a huge opportunity in Canada, a lot of production in agriculture, and so DuPont, a large portion of our sales and growth we anticipate being in that area. Secondly, of course, in automotive, and Craig talked about that. We are a company that invented nylon, and we continue to develop and optimize materials for lightweighting automobiles and so on. And third is in the oil sands. In the oil sands, as we all know, the tremendous opportunity for energy supply, and we're focused on 3 things. One is safety, the second is improving the environment, protecting the environment, and making the processes that we use to extract the bitumen and produce oil for our society to be more reliable and more efficient. And so we're focusing on increased productivity. On a global basis, we manage our R&D organization. We look at our core competencies for science and technology. On the right-hand side in green, you'll see the new technologies, new competencies that we've added for our agriculture and biotechnology. On the left-hand side, the more traditional chemistry and engineering and sciences competencies that we've had over the years. And for DuPont, it's the integration of these different technologies to provide solutions. "85% of the $1.7 billion of R&D budget on a global basis is devoted to these major megatrends. And 60% of that is directed towards feeding our world. Now, if you look at our 9,500 scientists we have globally, we have some major centers of R&D, and we have some smaller research facilities and business-oriented research around the world, and in total about 150 centers, several of them in Canada. Now in Canada, we have about $1 billion of our $35 billion worth of sales is in Canada. We have about 1,400 employees. Around 220 of those employees work in research. That research is in two major areas. The first is our large process and scale-up innovation center at Kingston, Ontario. The second is we have in yellow, and you'll see in the screen, a number of facilities spread around Canada, focused primarily on agriculture. So, where does research get done in DuPont? With 9,500 people, how do we decide who does what and where does it get done and why? Well, for the DuPont company, it starts with the customer. And in the center there, you'll see the market opportunity. Research gets done when you need to be close to the customers for collaboration. So the size of the local market opportunity is a big determinant around where research gets done around our corporation. Secondly, there could be a big market opportunity, but the question becomes, what kind of a business case is there for the research you're going to do? What is the value proposition? Now, this is where the opportunity to connect with Canada. And that is that where you're going to do it needs to be affordable. And it needs to be competitive with work that you can do somewhere else in the world. And so that's the reality, is that it's not just Canada versus US. It's for many other countries we have to compete against. And they have incentive systems and support infrastructure to try to attract new research and investment. And so government incentives are an important factor in how we decide where the work gets done, because it helps us mitigate our risk, depending on the type of research we're going to do. Now, of course, there's corporate and strategic, considerations in that, but at the end of the day, it's the strength of that business and value proposition that drive the research that we do. Now, having said that, a government incentive in and of itself is not going to bring research to Canada for DuPont. Because when you're in a business, it's very important around the competency you have. And so for DuPont, it's important that we look at the organization is going to do the work. What's their track record? Do they have the experience? Do they have the background? Do they have the competency? Are they able to hire and retain the critical mass of resources to do that work through the business and development cycle? Very important factor. Secondly, on the right-hand side is we need to have a support environment that allows us to have good collaboration. And that's something we do have a lot in Canada. We need to have the facilities, of course. We need to have a compatible regulatory environment. And we need to be able to partner with universities, government facilities, and customers in a way that allows us to facilitate the development process. And of course, at the bottom is what type of innovation is it? And that really comes back to the left-hand side around competency, because in DuPont, different areas of competency exist around the world. In the US, we may have our fundamental research in Wilmington, Delaware. Our industrial biotechnology may be in California. Our scale-up and commercialization expertise happens to be in Kingston. Our industrial seed technology and genomics is in Iowa with Pioneer. So we have to leverage this in order to figure out where's the right stage and where should the work be done. But at the end of the day, what we have to do, regardless of where the resources are, is almost all the work that we do is collaborative across the boundaries of Canada and across, through the DuPont network and with our customers on a global basis. Now, there was a report done by the Canadian manufacturers and exporters last year. It was quite a good report on the innovation challenge. There's a couple of things I picked out of that. First is around government policies. And the key message there was that it's there to encourage business investment and innovation. Secondly, very important, is it's not the job of government to design the policies and the processes that we do to interact around driving investment and research. It's not to pick the winners and losers, because frankly, it's hard enough to do that in industry. And the truth is that in industry and in R&D in industry, most projects don't succeed. Those few that do have to run through the gauntlet. The idea in industry is to learn fast, fail quickly, and get on to the next opportunity because it may be the next big one. So, what do we want government to do? We want it to have an enabling environment that allows us to accelerate the opportunities to win in the marketplace. And so what we want government to do is enable, but do that in a way that's selective around strategic choices that need to be made, and not necessarily a paintbrush across the entire thing. Now, the other thing to notice here is that we view R&D, of course, as an investment, and it's a productive asset. Secondly is that, and Avram talked about it very clearly, if you make money, you will invest. And if you find an opportunity to make more money and make it faster, and an innovation helps you do that, then you'll invest. So it's not all government here. The business has to have a right set of strategies on a corporate basis to be able to drive innovation. And at the end of the day, we want to make sure that we are able to have a tax environment that's predictable through the business cycle, and Canada is open for business. Now, accelerating innovation, I won't spend a lot of time on this. We've already talked a little bit about how we're underinvesting versus other countries in the OECD. We talk about, and some of the reasons why that is around the NAFTA, and I think that we're going to need to encourage industry to spend more on innovation if they see it on a corporate basis as a strategy to grow. As far as an innovation culture, the hunger to win and playing not to lose, willingness to fail and to get back up and go at it again is an important contribution to have, an aspect in our society. Business leadership, we feel that, and we also believe that in some areas we're complacent around this, is that we should be investing more and we need to step up. And we want government as the enabler. And for sure, DuPont is going to be investing in Canada. You know, we talked about those three major areas that we're going to focus on in Canada. We're going to be investing. We're going to add our innovation resources in Canada because we see a large market opportunity. So what does that mean around what can accelerate DuPont investment in Canada? Well, first of all, there's been some reports written recently that might suggest that the shred is not very effective. You know, we don't agree with that in DuPont. We think the shred is very important. You know, it allows us to be competitive globally in our R&D network. And so it's not the end all, but we do think there's an opportunity to make improvements in that system. And so for us, we believe shred is very attractive to get R&D here. We see it as collaborative. We'd prefer not to have the interaction be sort of an audit and disallow format where the focus is that, but more focus on how can we get more activity, more research to come to Canada. One of the areas that, of course, are very difficult is scaling up the innovation to commercialization, because at the end of the day, it's good to have the R&D, but it's not any good if you can get it to commercialize. And so getting it through that valley of death is expensive and very challenging. The second thing is, what can we do to get more research? That is, there's plenty of opportunities in a company that spends almost $2 billion a year to attract research and growth opportunities into Canada. And if we do it in the areas that with market opportunities, then it's particularly a win-win. And so what we'd like to see is there's an opportunity to modify the systems we have today and the policies that would make it really encouraging for DuPont to make an investment in those market opportunities here in Canada, rather than looking at China, India, and Brazil, where they have very strong incentives. Because once we bring a research activity here, it's unlikely to leave next year. It stays for quite some time, and then it builds upon itself. And of course, we'd like to have a streamlined process. You know, one of the most frustrating things in dealing with the government is the paperwork and the reporting required to submit for a proposal. And we know that it's important to have a good, well-thought-out plan, because we don't want to waste taxpayer money, and we certainly don't want to waste the company's money. And so, but finding that right balance to being able to execute on a project quickly is important. When it takes 8 or 9 months to prepare the paperwork, often what we find in business is that the market has changed, and now we have to make a correction. And what we've seen in our experience over the last few years is going back to the government before the paperwork, the ink has even been dry, for a modification because of a change in market situation is not received very well. And especially when we go back and tell them we don't want to spend the money because it's not a good business opportunity. And yet, you know, the government should say, that's a great idea, let's not spend that money, let's spend it somewhere else. So our view is that together we can accomplish a lot, and I want to emphasize that I think the policies we have in Canada are important, and I don't think we should be throwing the baby out with the bathwater around SR&ED or some of these other things. Let's update those, let's accelerate what we're trying to do in terms of innovation on the policy side, so that we can bring more innovation to Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sorry about the computer. Well, I won't make any comments about technology. David Collier will wrap up the presentations, and then we'll get into some questions. So David, from the oil and gas industry background. Thanks.
Thanks, Bernard. I represent the upstream oil and gas producers in Canada. This is not the year of oil and gas, although if you're reading the newspaper very often you might conclude otherwise, given the amount of attention we're getting. What I want to start by saying is I think it's very important to think about technology and innovation in the context of the oil and gas sector and what you might argue are established industries in Canada. We also often talk about technology innovation largely in the context of new opportunities, new industries, new businesses. And I don't want to diminish in any way the importance of that, but I think we also need to think about this subject very much in the context of building on a very well-established and very important part of our economy. And just to provide that a little bit of context around that, the oil and gas industry is the largest private sector investor in Canada. We invest about $50 billion a year. In our sector, our revenues are about twice the size of the auto sector, just to put that in context, 25% of the value of the TSX. So this is an industry that is not just in Alberta, it's not just in Western Canada, it has an impact right across the country, and I'll come back to that theme a little bit later. My remarks are going to be in two parts. I want to just start by talking about the drivers for innovation in our sector, and then I want to talk a little bit about some of the barriers that we see and some of the actions that might be taken to address those. So first, let me just start with the drivers for innovation. So why does this matter? Why is it important? And I'd suggest, again, in the context of the oil and gas sector, but I think some of these comments are much more broadly applicable, six points as to why innovation matters for oil and gas. First is that we've got abundant oil and gas resources in Canada. We've got the third largest crude oil reserves in the world. We've got 100 years of plus of natural gas supply. And finding more cost-effective ways to extract those resources is obviously extremely important. The shale gas story is a tremendous technology and innovation story. This is a resource that's been known about for a long time, and it's really the application of technology, horizontal drilling and fracturing technology, that's allowed us to unlock that resource and to do it economically. So that's just one example. Second, we're on the wrong part of the cost curve, frankly, when we look at oil and gas resources in Canada, for crude oil on a global scale and for natural gas on a North American scale. So tremendous opportunity to apply technology to drive costs down and make us more competitive. And that theme of competitiveness, I think, will run through many of my remarks, and I think is, again, applicable to many elements of this discussion of this subject in Canada. Third, I think we'd all like to see more value-added activity in Canada across, again, a range of industry, but competitiveness is an issue, whether that's scale, whether it's geographic location, whether it's size of market. There's a diversity of factors. And again, technology and innovation can help us be more competitive in creating more value-added opportunities in this country. Fourth, and again, this applies to a range of industries, we all need to continue to improve environmental and social performance, and I'm an absolute believer that technology and innovation is going to be the key lever to allow us to do that. Fifth, development of new technologies is an export opportunity. We don't often talk about that enough, I don't think, in this country, but if we can develop innovative technologies, that's an opportunity not only to export the technology, but to export some of the value-added opportunities that follow from it. And sixth, if I put technology innovation in a policy context, I think public policy often needs to be grounded in a good understanding of what technology is capable and, frankly, not capable of doing. If you think about policy and regulatory stretch, the context of our industry, it's important that we be pushed, frankly, at times in terms of performance, but that's got to be in the context of what technology is actually capable of delivering and in what time frame. So I think across quite a spectrum of areas, there are obvious drivers for technology and innovation, and it's important, as I said earlier, not only to Alberta or Western Canada, but I think to the country as a whole. So let me switch gears now and talk about some of the barriers and I think some of the things we might do about them. First, just to qualify my remarks a little bit on this, I think the glass is half full rather than half empty. I think we've got a very strong track record on technology innovation in Canada. I think we're a little unduly self-critical at times. And I think we got a really good foundation to build on. And I don't subscribe to the assertion that's actually in the lead into the panel that businesses in Canada invest very little in research and development, so they've got little need to hire highly skilled workers. I don't think that's the case at all, and I don't think certainly don't think it's the case for our industry. Having said that, we live no question, we live in a global business environment where we need to be competitive, and in that context, I think the technology and innovation agenda is extremely important. So let me just highlight 5 barriers to innovation that I think we need to think about. First is measurement and reporting. I actually don't think we do a very good job of this as an industry or as a government in Canada. Our reporting is often driven by the tax system. It excludes a lot of things that I think are would be rightly included in technology and innovation. And back to what gets measured gets done. If we don't understand what we're investing in technology and innovation, we don't understand the trends very well. I think it's very difficult for industry or government policymakers, frankly, to do a good job in managing and leading the innovation agenda. So that's an opportunity, I think, clearly for improvement. Second, David talked about the tax system and fiscal incentives. The SHRED program, we believe, is a very useful program. We think the definition of eligibility for that program is too narrow. Frankly, it's much more geared, I think, to what's been being done and what can be done in the laboratory, as opposed to what gets done in the field. And there's an awful lot of innovation that takes place in the application of technology. And we think, as an industry, that there's an opportunity to broaden the definition and also be more targeted in areas where we truly have competitive advantage. And we were, frankly, a bit disappointed in the Jenkins report. There's some useful work in it, But I really think it was a huge missed opportunity in terms of actually making substantive change in the technology and innovation agenda in Canada. We can talk about that a little bit more in the Q&A. Third is collaboration. We're a pretty competitive industry, and we frankly don't play very well in the sandbox together. We've got to get better as an industry, and I think, again, this cuts across other sectors, at collaborating on technology development, I think particularly in the environmental area, but other areas as well. And I would extend that comment to collaboration across sectors and among industry, academia, governments, and research institutions. We just don't do a terribly good job of working together on some of the challenges that we have in Canada. Fourth is the changing structure of the industry. Again, no question that we're in a globalized world. There are competitive pressures, a lot of pressure on smaller entrepreneurial companies oftentimes. We've got ownership in major companies that's global, not national or local. So I think it's really important that we have strategic focus around technology and innovation in Canada. Where do we potentially have competitive advantage, and how can we leverage that, not only within sectors or within particular jurisdictions, but more broadly across the economy and across the country. And just to come back to a theme that Avram and others have talked about, I think there needs to be a much stronger business pull. You know, I look at this in the context that we need demand pull much more so, I think, oftentimes than supply push, if you will, on technology and innovation. And I think a successful and competitive business environment in Canada, successful businesses are going to drive increased investment in R&D as much or more, frankly, than the funding we put into academic institutions or research institutions. So I don't think any of those barriers are insurmountable, but we need to, I think, collectively get more focused on resolving them and working together to move this agenda forward. The context of energy, I think an energy strategy can be a valuable lever in moving this conversation forward. And I think technology and innovation are a critically important part of any discussion about energy strategy in Canada. So I think we've got the potential to be a global leader. We talk about being an energy superpower. If we're going to be that, we have to be a leader in technology and innovation. And I think some of the areas that I've talked about and others on the panel have talked about today are an opportunity to move that agenda forward, and I'm optimistic we can do that. Bernard, with that, I'll leave it, turn it back to you.
Now we get into the fun part and asking questions, and we'll go around a couple of questions that I've already got, and then we'll open it up to questions from the floor, because I think we've got so we got a half an hour for questions and debate and so on. And one of the questions that I think is how do you think that policy development can be changed to better factor in the dynamics and the needs of business and industry? And I'm going to start off by asking Craig if he could comment on that, and then we'll get reactions from the other members of the panel.
I think what would be really helpful would be if the government could develop policies and programs that had a lot of flexibility to them and encouraged business-driven decision-making. And really the government is moving in this direction, and they really need to be applauded for it. The government is, I'm talking about the federal government here, they've set up a number of business-led centers of excellence. And we're participating on one of them. It's called the Aboro Nano Network. And what it does is that the government is given, and it's industry-driven, and what the government has done is they've given a pot of money to those business folks to disperse on basic and applied research. And what that network has done, and they've brought in, and David talked about this, is it linked government and university labs with industry labs. And it brought together multiple sectors. There's forestry, there's automotive, there's consumer, we've got oil and gas involved. And this is like a skunk works, where industry and government and universities have the freedom to experiment and to take risks and to absorb failures and to be able to pull, as David Yates talked about, pull the plug on projects that you see it's going off course, pull the plug on it. So I would encourage on a policy development, further continuation of these business-led centers of excellence. I think it's still in the very formative stages, but I think we're seeing some really good progress and some tremendous collaboration between government, universities, and industries on a cross-sectoral basis.
Okay, Avram, you wanted to follow up on that?
I think the only way we're going to get policies that really work for business is to go back to the rather old concept of industrial strategies. Our experience of industrial strategies in Canada is pathetic because we've only done them two ways. One is we've chosen industries which are otherwise failing, and government then tries to develop an industrial strategy to stop it from failing. Or we take a region which seems to be incapable of developing industry and have industrial strategies to get that region to all of a sudden become prosperous. If you look around the world, industrial strategy succeeds many places because it's driven by something other than social equity values. It's driven by business sense. And if we did industrial strategy with the idea of actually making money, which can then be distributed for equity purposes, we probably find that they actually work. They don't work all the time. The difference between government and business very often is that business fails. You know, people always say government never gets it right. That's not true. Business fails more often than government. But when we fail, we just go away. Whereas when government fails, just keep doing the same thing over and over again. So our failures are more useful. And so government tends to be scared of business industrial strategy because sometimes it's going to be wrong. Well, of course, that's business. And there's a worry that if we had industrial strategies, it would be government choosing winners, which doesn't have to be the case. The way it could work, and certainly we've come pretty close with it with the pathways work we've done with natural resources and the forest industry, is that government and industry together explore, first of all, market futures, because that's where you always have to start. Explore different economic advantages and disadvantages that Canada has to factor into what we're doing. And from that, get a sense of possibility. And from that sense of possibility, ask what government policies would best nurture industry seizing those possibilities. What shifts in transportation policy, trade policy, tax policy, energy policy, go all the way through. How are those policies now inhibiting achieving that sense of possibility, and how could they be changed so that they would nourish that sense of possibility? And then stuff will happen.
David, you wanted to follow up?
Yeah, just a couple of comments I'd make. One is I think you've got to start with the premise that you're trying to create a competitive business environment. Because I firmly believe that there will be times where you can, through technology, create businesses. But I think more often, successful businesses, a successful investment, or the appropriate investment climate in a country is going to drive healthy businesses. And those businesses are going to grow and they're going to reinvest in technologies that can keep them growing. So I kind of start again with create a competitive business environment in Canada through policy, fiscal and otherwise. The regulatory reform opportunity, I think, is huge. Create a successful investment climate, and you'll then realize the benefits of that. Second is I'm not a big fan of top-down industrial strategy. And when I talk about a Canadian energy strategy, that's not what I'm, just to be clear, that's not what I'm referring to. I think it's much more along the lines of a comment that was made a moment ago, with the federal government acting as an enabler, bringing together groups that perhaps might not otherwise come together, enabling technology clusters to form, and facilitating that connectivity that I talked about earlier. And I think there is a role for government in doing that. It can happen without government, but I think that enabling role is important, and I think the work that's been done on in various forums around centers of excellence, technology clusters, cross-sectoral collaboration is a very important role for governments to play, and I think it's often the federal government that should in fact be playing that role.
Okay. David, you got
Yes,
something?
I'd like to add one aspect. As a large multinational corporation, when we see incentives to drive innovation in Canada, it's often focused on small, medium enterprises. And it almost feels like a jobs bill, because the focus is create jobs, rather than driving economic growth. If you drive economic growth, the jobs will follow where they are created, where the wealth is created. And so I am a proponent of SMEs, because most of our customers in DuPont are SMEs. But it seems like when I look at the Jenkins report and some other things, it's so focused on SMEs, like, well, the multinationals, it doesn't matter what we do, they aren't going to increase anything anyway. The point is, large multinationals have a tremendous resource base and cash base, especially my friend on the right here, to be able to channel into these market spaces, because those are the companies that are going to be able to drive the scale up into commercialization, because that's where the real risk occurs.
Craig, you want to follow up?
If we could just, yeah. I would just like to reinforce David's comment. I mean, we're the auto sector. There's a lot of major auto parts, but we find the same thing. There's a bias towards SMEs and not wanting to provide the incentives to the large companies. But it's these large companies drive the bus and drive the train. And you can snap all kinds of these SMEs into the large companies and create these wonderful relationships. So I think government is seriously going astray here by this overemphasis on just funding SMEs and saying the large companies can fend for themselves. I think it's a major, major error.
I want to jump in on that too.
Okay.
Business exists in an economic ecosystem, and the interrelationship between small and large business is very organic. We feed each other, we nourish each other, we create energy together, and the idea that you can support the ecosystem by choosing one strata of the ecosystem is just silly. It just doesn't work. In our industry, the SMEs tend to be harvesters, people who run machinery, some of the marketing people, obviously the transport companies, the cafeteria. All of those depend upon the basic nourishment in the ecosystem of the big company that's creating the economic activity. So if you want to have a healthy economic ecosystem, you have to provide energy for all the constituent parts.
Let me move on to another question, and then we'll open it up to the floor. You represent this supply chain from the resource side through transformation in chemistry to the users. And we've talked a lot about government and what government could do, but outside of that, what do you think are the biggest blockages, other than government policy, that impede commercialization of technology here in Canada? Who wants to start? David? Dave?
I'll just offer a quick comment to build on one of the comments I made in my remarks. I think one of the key impediments is we don't talk to each other enough across jurisdictions and across sectors. We're very siloed, I believe. In the oil and gas sector, we worry about the oil and gas sector. One of the things we've been trying to do, with some success actually, is engage in discussions with the clean tech sector in Ontario, as an example. You know, so we talk about creating connectivity across the country and across sectors. You know, the conventional supply chain, you know, manufacturing pumps and valves and things like that for construction facilities in Western Canada is something we've always done. But, you know, for example, there are significant opportunities, I think, for the clean tech sector in Ontario to contribute to improving environmental performance in oil sands. But we've got to create that connectivity. We've got to make people aware of what that opportunity is. And we've got to have those kinds of conversations. And I don't think we do nearly enough of that, either cross-jurisdictionally or cross-sectorally. And I think it's a tremendous opportunity for us to improve the way we focus on technology and innovation in Canada.
Evan, you want
Just,
to pick up?
First of all, to second that, the answer is often outside the box. And so only talking to people inside the box doesn't usually get you where you want to go. But add to that is government can really help offset first mover risk. And any sort of game changer technology for an industry, whoever adopts it first either does really well or goes bankrupt. The whole sector can be revolutionized if it turns out that this new technology works. And so it's a perfect role for government to help offset first mover risk when something reaches just about at the commercial stage and a company is willing to invest heavily in the first commercialization. That's a great place for government to come in with funding, because if the first mover proves it works, the entire sector can follow suit.
Great. Oh, Dave. Dave first, and then.
Yes, I guess when I look at the DuPont ecosystem, what I would say, and I like that word actually, it's very good, Ephraim. Yeah, I would say that the situations where our corporation has not been very successful is when we've gotten very short-sighted and we attempt to go after the great opportunities that appear to be low-hanging fruit. We go after it and we drive that one and we put all of our resources in that, and guess what happens? More often than not, it doesn't succeed. And so a healthy economy needs to have a pipeline. And so corporations need to have a robust pipeline that has new ideas coming through it and get filtered out and die, and ones that are able to proceed through this gauntlet and go through commercialization. And so when we look at the industry in Canada, one of the things that I know we have not taken advantage of enough of are the national labs in Canada. And I think one of the things that the Jenkins report did get right, and I know some changes are happening now in the national labs to focus on clusters and technology areas, I think that's very good to work on some strategic areas that our country can win. And that's an area that will resonate with our company and our customers, is we can collaborate together to do that. The only fly in the ointment around collaboration with DuPont is that all the parties have to win. And we can't socialize the intellectual property. We have to figure out where your competitive advantage is going to be and how it can be sustainable. And so that's one of the things that will be very important when we think about how to collaborate in these clusters.
Okay, Craig?
I would agree with all of the speakers there. You know, the name of our organization is the Ontario Bio-Auto Council, and I think we learned very quickly that to be successful, we have to look beyond the borders of Ontario. We have to look nationally. We have to look globally. And one of the things that we're doing at the Bio-Auto Council is trying to reach out to across Canada, to the Western provinces, to other industries, and to make that connection to our national labs. We just did a partnership between Magna, one of our biggest parts companies, and the National Research Council to put in a global composite center in Toronto. And that's that idea of working with government to identify a strategic direction that you'd like to pool your resources. And this is going to give us a chance to be able to pull together assets across the country, from labs across the country, from sectors across the country, and try to drive it forward through that partnership with the national labs.
Okay, thank you. Can I have Questions from the audience, and could there be questions and not treaties? So quick questions so that we can have the panel make some comments. Yes, sir.
Thank you. Michael Bork from the Chemistry Industry Association. I heard two things that really were interesting, and that was sort of a call for an energy strategy and also a call from forest products for an industrial strategy. And I'm wondering, does this mean that in this country we're not strategic enough? And also, how does a science R&D strategy fit into this? Because I didn't hear a lot of good things about the Jenkins report. So I'm wondering if you can each take a shot at tying those thoughts together.
You want 3 questions? And, right? 3 questions, and you can play with them. You go ahead and ask your question anyway.
Sure. Well, I want to thank the panel for their insights. It's quite important, I think, to get them, because I really agree that the conversations aren't happening between all the stakeholders appropriately. My question's related to the fact that we had a terrific session yesterday on what's called open innovation. And we actually learned yesterday that our current system of IP and sort of patent protectioning in many cases stifles innovation and is sort of contrary to this new concept of open innovation. And I guess I'm just curious about your thoughts regarding open innovation and how this could be a new mechanism for really propelling innovation across all the stakeholders.
Okay. Do you want to give your question, and then we'll stop and try and answer some of these questions? I hope we can remember what the first one was.
We're taking notes on paper.
Okay. Go ahead.
My question has to do with the science policy and your feelings about the science policy. I'm a researcher, assistant professor down at Ohio State University. I'm Canadian, and I spent most of my career in Canada, but I went down to do my PhD and have stayed because I haven't found a job up here yet. But that's. But the thing is I'm wondering, when I listen to what science policy is up here, I hear a lot of the research that is being done in the United States, and the idea of small and medium enterprises being what drives it, and the link to universities being what drives it. And so I'm curious as to how much maybe that this is being driven by what's understood in the United States as being an innovation process versus the way that it actually works in Canada. And are we pulling, are we doing science policy where we're taking what is understood in a different country and trying to apply it to what is being done here? Maybe that's not the most appropriate, or is it just because I have a U.S.-centered focus right now, and so I'm missing something? So I just would like your comments on that, please.
Okay. Who wants to start?
I can remember the first one.
Huh?
I can remember the first question.
You can remember the first question. All right. Well, you start then. Yeah.
All right. Good. Yeah, just back to the question about energy strategy. I think we do need one, and when I say that, it's not a top-down, federal government-driven, centrally managed strategy. It's got to be more organic than that. It's got to involve federal government, provincial governments, industry, other stakeholders. And why do I think we need one? I think, frankly, simply the act of working on a strategy creates the kind of conversation we need. Across sectors and among different interests, and that's important. I think if we can get aligned around where we want to go and know where we want to go, that's going to be good for Canada in terms of advancing our agenda within the country. I think the other important reason for having an energy strategy or a strategy in any other sector is we send very confusing messages to other countries about what we're about, what our priorities are, what we want to do, what we don't want to do. And I think if we could get our heads around a broader energy strategy, we'd be much more effective also in advancing our interests internationally. And it's not just energy, it's energy and environment. So I think for all of those reasons, we should have one. It's not an easy thing to do. People still remember the National Energy Program, and there's still some baggage around that. But I think it's something we should try and do, and not to repeat myself, but I think just trying to do it, whether we can actually get there at the end of the day or not, is going to create some very healthy conversations, which will do us all good in any event. And I firmly believe, as I said earlier, that technology and innovation have to be an integral part of any strategy around energy or any other industrial sector.
Okay, Avram, don't forget we got asked about open innovation, so that you're going to deal with that. But Avram first.
I'm in favor of open innovation. The number of government activities and interventions in industry are huge. You've got environmental policy, you've got transportation policy, you have all the interventions on energy, you have all the stuff on tax, you have all the spending on R&D, you have all the international relations related to markets. Government is intimately and massively involved in industrial strategy. The government is very reluctant to articulate coherent industrial strategy. So what you have is huge intervention without taking a step back and asking what is its net result. And because so much government intervention happens in topic silos in departments and within pieces of departments, the potential for help of many of these things where they are well done is muted by the other parts. And where they're not well done, no one knows they're not well done because no one knows what it's all about. So I'm not in favor of top-down government industrial strategy, but doing that much stuff, that much powerful and influential stuff without stopping and saying, where could this all be going? What sorts of things do we wish to enable? What would a competitive business climate look like? Without asking that right across the range of government interventions is not strategic. And so we have a million tactical interventions and very, very little strategic reflection.
And maybe we don't measure the right things either. That might drive some of this cross-government. That was something that you brought up earlier on, David, about measurement. But you want to say something about IP and open innovation?
Open innovation is an industrial necessity today. The cost of getting products commercialized is just too high in most cases to do it by yourself. And so it's a matter of leveraging other resources that are complementary to you, finding the right business partner that you can work with, that there's a cultural compatibility, and leveraging that to reduce the risk. I mean, that's what it's about, is the gain versus the risk. And I think there's an excellent comment. And we look at innovation much broader than just technology, by the way, because you have to have the right channel to market. You want to be able to bring your customers into that open innovation framework early on, because they understand the needs. And the worst thing you can do is to have a product all dressed up, ready to go. In fact, there's an old saying in the industry, no longer true, I might add, at DuPont, but which is the best day a product ever had was the day before it got launched. Because the day it launches, you know, you get that deafness of silence, or the whatever you want to call it, but the silence can be deafening, if you will. It's about risk reduction, and so innovation is important, and collaboration will be important. When we look at open innovation, the IP side is very important. We don't do a deal before we talk about, with all of our parties, who owns what and how each party is going to benefit from on a financial basis. And that goes with the government as well when we start working with the government.
Okay. David, you wanted to follow up, but remember we had a question about, are we taking US policy and trying to layer it onto a Canadian system, which is very different?
Just want to make one, I'll be really quick, and it's related to the IP issue. And a little bit different perspective on that than David just described. I think our industry is increasingly of the view that in some areas, and environmental performance stands out as one of those areas, we just have to get past the IP issue and say, look, the industry is better served by everybody collaborating and sharing IP. It's not a competitive advantage, company by company. If we get it right, it's a competitive advantage for the industry, and we need to pool or share IP in order to advance the industry interest as opposed to individual company interest. So I just wanted to, in some context, I think the IP issue, we need to find another way around.
Well, actually, I agree with you, David, because it depends on what's your competitive advantage.
Yeah.
If you're digging stuff out of the ground and converting it into oil, and you have a commodity market, the competitive advantage is the real estate you own and the cost at which you can bring it out versus what you sell the oil for. However, when you're a service and technology provider to your
Agreed.
industry and association, it's important for us to know that if we spent millions of dollars in 10 years to develop a technology, that we can get a return on that, because it probably takes us a good 15 years to get a return back, and then we have to earn the opportunity cost of not investing in another market, for example, like forestry or other areas.
Yeah, that's right.
One quick
No, you
point.
asked something
Yeah.
about the United States. I'm sorry, I can't answer that question because I'm an American and I'm biased. So, I'm, you know, it's a conflict of interest. I have to put it right out on the table now.
I wanted to make a point that there is a good example of cross fertilization and support and so on in the environmental area in what the chemical industry has done with responsible care. Because we were told when we started that we'd run into legal problems, and in actual fact we didn't, and we were able to build on that, and a lot of good work came out of that. So there is a model on that. And Craig, you want to say something about the policy thing?
I just wanted to the third question about science policy. Should we have kind of a made in Canada science policy as opposed to adopting things that are taking place elsewhere? And I think there's some merit of thinking about that. Like our experience in the auto sector is we put a lot of money into science and technology in Canada, but the reality is it'd never really be able to compete with what's going on in Europe and China, the United States, and elsewhere. And how we've positioned ourselves in our council is basically to scour the world, looking for IP, looking for things that have been developed elsewhere, either in universities or labs or companies, and being quick to get in there to grab that technology and drive the investment into Ontario. So we were looking at projects, for example, where the Americans have spent $400 million in science and technology, developing the technology over 20 years, but have been slow at doing the last stage of commercialization. And what we've done is partnered up with government programs to get in there first to drive that U.S. technology into Ontario. So it's let the Americans and the Europeans spend billions in science and technology if we're quick on our feet to exploit it and be quick adopters. We can leverage all those U.S. and European investments in science and technology.
So those of you who have done your PhDs in the United States and have developed some good ideas and technology, bring them back here and we'll try and get them commercialized. That's the story. One final question, and then we have to wrap it up. So, sir.
Actually, just following on page 32, I quote, seems everybody realizes the problem. A large part of the problem is that business in Canada invests very little in research and development. So they have little need to hire highly skilled workers. And the question is, what's the solution? I mean, in terms of natural resources, Canada is a superpower. But I wonder whether the industry leader and the funding agencies intend to invest more money in R&D and attract highly skilled workers in the near future. Okay.
Well, I guess my quick answer to that is, as I said in my earlier remarks, I actually don't agree with that assertion that's in the materials. I think the industry actually does invest a tremendous amount in innovation and technology, and there's going to be a very strong pull on highly skilled, scientists, engineers, et cetera, I think in Canada for a long time to come. Some of the ways I think that we can improve it are the things I talked about earlier. Strategic focus. Let's understand better, what we're measuring. Some of the fiscal incentives. Getting focused on where we really do have competitive advantage. I think the early adopter model is a good one. There's a number of things we can do, but I think the representation that this is a country that is not focused on technology and innovation and doesn't have an interest in and demand for skilled people in those fields is not a fair representation of where we are as an industry. I think it is a fair representation perhaps of how we think about ourselves in this country and investing in technology and innovation, which I think is part of the problem, frankly.
In DuPont, about 85% of the research that we do in my organization is in support of global growth. We have projects in Taiwan, we have them in Asia, we have them in Europe. You know, wherever the opportunity is to grow is where we work. And so we have a very diverse workforce. This year we hired people from India, from China, from Latin America, because we need that sort of diversity. So diversity of skills, backgrounds, as well as competencies in certain technologies. And so we believe that the area of competency we have in our corporation at our facility in Kingston is a way to leverage that on a global basis. And over the next 5 years, the question that we're going to ask and try to answer is, how can we double down on that and now channel that 85%, a greater percentage of that, into the really large market opportunities that we have in Canada, and especially oil and gas, where we, up to this point, have not invested the kind of resources that we need with customers. And so this next year, we're going to be looking at that, and we're looking at the possibility of putting in innovation centers, both in agriculture as well as in oil and gas, focused on the things that are unique in this marketplace. And for us, that's our investment. And now what we're hoping, and we believe we will be able to do, is have an interaction with provincial as well as federal government to find a way to do that in a way that's inclusive with more than just DuPont, but with the industry itself, and more of a we'll call it inclusive innovation approach.
Okay, thank you. We're going to have to wrap up now because coffee break is started, but I would like to say that some of the people will still be around. I know there are a few other questions that people wanted, but I think we've heard some interesting themes here this morning. A big one is collaboration and talking to each other, breaking silos down between the different sectors. The other one was choosing where we have the strengths, and this was something that we did deliberately when we created the BioAuto Council. We said, you know, what can we do? We're a very small amount of money, where can we put it? And I think that is true of us as a country. We have a very small amount of money compared to what the United States and Europe and China can invest. So there are things that we can do around that. The other thing that I would like to try to leave us with is that over the last 10 years, we've had how many reports with bunches of recommendations in it, but no action. We need to figure out how we can create an entity that picks up on some of these ideas and puts them into action, so that we end up with a framework that creates a balance between, I know there are a lot of university people that would like to get more money. My view is if the pot is fixed, we have to figure out what the right balance is between basic research and applied research and the commercialization end of it, because it's a continuum, and if we don't keep that continuum going, the thing will fritter away over time. So we need to develop a thing, whatever that is, that can come up with some action that allows us to take the good technology that we're developing and get it into the marketplace and start the ball rolling, keep the ball rolling, so that we can maintain our standard of living. So thank you very much. Thank you all the panel members. And as I say, some of them will be around if you want to ask them some specific questions. Thank you.